Now I can also double check and make sure that it is recording by going back to that control thing. And this shows me that this program FFmpeg is getting the getting the microphone input from the H2 analog stereo, which is the microphone that I have, and this is the recording level. So I'm pretty sure it's recording the audio this time, unless the software itself is not set up right. But everything else, seems to suggest that it should be doing just fine this time. Okay, so let's go back to the class material. And the first thing we can do is to talk about the homework solution, or the solution to the homework that we have today that is due before the class. And I think the last person who turned it in at about 5 something. So that's not a regular hour to me. Yeah, my regular hours end at about 2 a.m. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the file. I have already informed the lab technicians about the problem with Firefox and Internet Explorer. There are 2 problems, and together they're kind of annoying, at least to a class like this. The first thing is, if you use Internet Explorer, you cannot log into Moodle. Okay? Now, this is a very weird problem because what it does is, well, this one is just being slow. It's actually working just fine. Internet Explorer somehow was convinced that it should not store any cookies associated with some profs. But it does not classify some profs as a hostile website. So I have no idea why it is kind of specific to someprofs.org. I tried it out with my netbook. I could not reproduce the problem. Yep.
Have you tried contacting Microsoft about that? It's worth a shot, even if
they might have it fixed already, because the lab is running software that is released in August. They use a program called Deep Freeze, so every time you reset the machine at the lab, the C drive, everything you do to the C drive is only temporary. When you reset the machine, it puts everything back to the original configuration. In other words, they're still running, the releases that they had in August. So that bug may have been fixed already for all that we know. That may have been fixed already. And then the same thing applies to Firefox. When you guys use Firefox in the lab to download or upload the files, sometimes it hangs up. But it's not consistent. It doesn't do it consistently, which makes the problem even harder to diagnose. And I use Firefox all day long, okay? And I have never seen a problem like that. So once again, it could be one of the transient problems with an older version of Firefox. And once again, they're running the version that is released in August. So that problem may have been fixed already. It's just that they have not updated the system yet. It is a big hassle to update in the lab because they have to re-ghost the images. They cannot just push out updates live on certain machines. They actually have to turn the machines into a different mode. They call it thawed. Basically it's not deep frozen anymore. Then they can make all the changes, and then they can freeze the machines again, so all the changes become effective. So it's a big hassle to update all the software, and all because they're not using Linux. I mean literally. I really mean it literally. I don't mean it as a joke. Because in Linux and in many other types of operating systems, even the OS, even the operating system itself can be loaded remotely through a network. In other words, you can have a system that has no hard drive, no CD drive, no memory card slots, no USB ports, and it will still be able to start up the system because the operating system is loaded through the network, from a server that is sitting somewhere else. So in that case, updating the system is just like that. Okay, all they have to do is to update, the source, restart all the machines, and they're done. Okay. Yep.
It's like using VMware Player.
Yep. It's not like using VMware Player because that's a simulation environment. That's an emulator, right? In this case, it's not emulated. Most PC BIOSes, has an option to boot from network. In other words, it will talk to the DHCP server, and not only to get the IP address, but also to say, okay, how should I boot? Give me the boot sector. But it is all done by the network. Okay, so the boot sector the quote-unquote boot sector can basically contain the code to load additional, code from the. It's actually what they call a TFTP server, a trivial file transfer protocol server, and they can load, the operating system, all the applications remotely. And these days we have what, gigabit per second, networking, which is pretty fast. I mean, it's not as fast as your hard drive, but most people cannot even come close to realizing the full potential of your hard drives anyway. Okay, so if they switch the operating system to Linux, they would have been able to do updates every single day, and you would not have noticed anything either, because they can just do it at the end of the day, spend maybe an hour at the most to keep everything updated, and they have to shut down all the machines anyway overnight. So the next day, when they start up all the PCs, all the workstations, they will all be running new software, updated software. But no, people don't want to run Linux. They want to use Windows.
Yeah, there's a reason for that.
There's a reason to that.
It's because most people, when they get out into the corporate world or whatever else, are likely to be using Windows.
Well, even that is changing now.
Yeah.
It's changing slowly, but it's definitely changing. If you're going into a web authoring, web programming environment, they don't use Windows much, in those conditions, in those environments anymore. They use a lot of Macs. Yeah, they use a lot of Macs in those, particular environments. Okay. Any other questions? Any comments? No. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the program that we have for our assignment first. Okay, this is the program for our assignment, and it is recursive because the subroutine is calling itself, is invoking itself from within. But if you follow just the mechanisms of invoking a subroutine and the mechanisms of returning from a subroutine, this one should not be any more difficult than a regular subroutine call type of algorithm. So we'll go ahead and do it. And obviously I have to save it first. And I forgot to make a new folder first. I'll do it now. And go ahead and save the file. How many people are planning to take cisp300 next semester? Okay, that's a good idea.
Are you going to teach that class?
Well, no. I can see some. I can see some reliefs already. It's like that. But if you have to take assembly language programming, I'll be teaching that one. I'll be the only one teaching that one too. evil laughter.
There's no much choices for 360.
Sorry?
There's not much choices for 360.
No. 360, you have two choices. At least, you can choose between Daemon Antos or Iraj Subsidiary.
He's not.
He's teaching it.
They're both teaching it. They always have two sections of CISP360s.
Raj is teaching it. I plan to sign up for his class.
Yeah, I think Damon is too. So they usually have at least these two professors teaching CISP360. Different teaching styles, but they're both good. One is more methodical. One has lots of homework, which is good because it forces the students to practice. And the other one is more flexible, kind of like me, and not have a whole ton of homework assignments. So it depends on your learning style, whether you need all the homework assignments and stuff like that.
And who's who?
And who's who? You can go to ratemyprofessors.com and find out.
Who is giving the homework and stuff?
Damon would give out more homework assignments. Has more, definitely more work to do. But some people actually need that, structured environment to learn something, and some other people do not. So it depends on the person. I can pick up about 90 or 95% of the material just from attending a lecture, when I was in college. So homework to me is like fun stuff. It's something that I enjoy doing, but I really do not need as much. Most of my textbooks back, when I was in college, they were in pristine condition, not a single mark anywhere. Because I buy the textbook because the teacher said you have to buy the textbook, and then they put it on the shelf. After a few years, you can see the dust on it, and that's about it. That's the only sign that it is used. It's the dust. But then I take notes in the class. I take a lot of notes in the class. That's the only thing I do in the class, is to make sure I can understand everything that the instructor was saying and take notes at the same time. And then spend lots and lots of time in the lab, just practicing on my own. Okay, so here we have the algorithm. And let's go ahead and take a look at the trace part of it. And we'll start execution in the first line that is outside of a subroutine, which is line 12 in this case. Line 12 is going to initialize n to 3 and becomes 3. Line 13 is going to invoke the subroutine. Whenever you invoke a subroutine, remember there are two things to do. One is to allocate a new column and remember where you're supposed to go back to. Since line 13 is already the last line, when you're done, you go back to post, which is indicating that when you're done with the subroutine, you're basically done with the entire program. Then we go into the subroutine, the subroutine that we are invoking, which is F1. And F1, we start with the first line that does something, which is line 2. Line 2 is a comparison. N is less than or equal to 1 is what? Okay. If it is false, we have to go to line 5. Line 5 says we want to decrement from n. N goes from 3 to 2. Then we go to line 6. Line 6 is invoking F1 again. Now, even though we are invoking F1 from within F1, it does not change what we have to do when we invoke a subroutine. We allocate a new column. Column E cannot be used at this point because it is actually being used at this point. So we have to use a new column, which is column F. And you have to follow, E, F, G, H, in that order. You cannot skip columns. Okay, because skipping columns means you're wasting resources. You're using columns for nothing. So you have to follow this order consecutively using column F this time. And once again, we use column F to remember where we're supposed to go back to. We are supposed to go back to line 7, so the return line number is just 7. And then we continue execution in the subroutine that we are invoking. It does not matter that we are coming from F1 ourselves. Okay? If we're invoking F1, we go to the first line of F1 and continue execution over there. Okay, so those rules do not alter just because we are from inside the same subroutine. So once again, we go back to line 2. N is less than or equal to 1 is false again because n is 2 at this point. Then we go to line 5 again, just like last time. We decrement n, so n goes from 2 to 1. Then we go to line 6, which is the invocation again. Once again, we allocate a new column, and then we remember where we're supposed to go back to, which again is line 7. And then once again, we go back into the first line of the subroutine that we're invoking, which is line 2. This time, n is less than or equal to 1 is true, because n is 1 this time, which means we go to line 3 instead of line 5. Line 3 is going to initialize r to 1. R, which is column D, is now initialized to 1. I'm now done with the conditional statement. We get out of the conditional statement, we go to the end of the subroutine. On line 10, we return from this particular subroutine. Every time you return from a subroutine, it is always doing the same two things. One is to look up the most recently created return line number column so that you know where you're supposed to go to continue execution. In this case, column G is the last one that we created. It tells me we're supposed to go back to line 7. So we go back to line 7 here, just to remember this is where we are supposed to go back to. But line 10